So for the first session of the day, we're going to welcome Laura Matti, Ramona Travers, and Ursina Levers. Laura, Ramona, and Ursina are experienced cybersecurity professionals working at Deloitte in the Cyber Risk Service team in Zurich. The three of them have worked on several projects across wide variety of cyber topic and wide variety of industry. So they have a very intense know-how in a wide range of security topics. Going to share insight on how to help businesses become cyber resilient.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and also a very warm welcome from our side. We are really excited to be here today and to get the honor to share some of our knowledge with you. And we have prepared two main parts for today's session. So in the first part, Laura will guide us through a bit of a theory background and explains how the cyber strategy toolkit works. And then in the second part, Ramona will facilitate a use case where we will learn how to apply the cyber strategy toolkit into a real life situation. But before we go into the details, let me also introduce ourselves a bit more. Laura, would you like to start?
Hi everyone. Great to be here. Laura Matti. I've studied economics and business journalism, and then I transitioned into the cyberspace. I've been working with Deloitte in the cyber strategy team for around 4 years now, and super excited to be here.
Thank you, Ramona.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm also part of the cyber team and I'm specialized in identity and access management. I'm particularly fond of the strategy topic because it is so diverse. So all the different mandates that we generally get, we have the underlying principles, which are always the same, right? But when you look at cyber, it's always really diverse, and the way you fine tune actually your solution is always very different, depending on the cyber topic you work on, depending on the client, but also depending on the industry, and that's just super exciting. So I'm glad to be here today.
Thank you very much. And about myself, I've been with Deloitte for 3 years now. I originally studied economics and international management, but I thought it's not interesting enough. I have to find something more challenging. And I found my true passion really in cybersecurity. I'm especially focused on detection and defense topics, which are both very much guided and based on our clients' cyber strategy. So knowing how this works, how you derive a cyber strategy is also part in how you then actually develop and help the clients for specific topics like detection and defense. But enough about ourselves. Let's get started. Our first section is a bit of background and explanation of what the cyber security strategy toolkit is about. So over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Ursina. So I'll try to make this theory part as exciting as it can be. So if you can go to the next slide. What is a cyber strategy? So that's the key question that we want to address here. The way we look at cyber strategy is usually in two main cases. So it could be an organization or a company that does not have capabilities in the information security space, that is basically starting from scratch to build a security organization. And that's what we call a greenfield approach. But there are also many cyber strategy forms and shapes for companies that do have already a quite established cybersecurity organization and would like to go through a strategic process, a transformation process, to get to the next level of the maturity across a wide range of cyber capabilities. So the way we look at this, or the way we could look at this and approach cyber strategy, is there are many different ways. One way would be to use the metaphor of a cookbook to make it very, very practical. And in this way, we would look at ingredients. So what we need to build, procure, or buy in order to create your cyber capabilities. Then you'd have recipes. So how do you mix all these ingredients together? What is your plan on a page? And then finally preparation. So you take out your pots and pans and you actually make that happen and you cook it. Or a more traditional method to look at this is design, define, deliver. Design, you'd basically ask yourself, what is the future business needs of my organization? What do we need to build in terms of cybersecurity? Then you would define it. So what is our target operating model across processes, people, and technology? And finally, you would deliver it. So you'd plan and launch a program, which is quite similar to that pots and pan metaphor. If we go to the next slide, Rosina. Thank you. Maybe just a quick overview of what are the main ingredients, speaking about the cookbook metaphor, that you'd really need to put together to have a solid strategy. So the first one is vision and mandate. And I think this gets often forgotten, but it's probably one of the most crucial ones. You need to know where you want to go in order to get there. And clearly the mandate, the support, if you think of big companies, the support you get from the executive committees, from the board, it's definitely crucial. Then the second piece would be assets knowledge. So you need to know what you're protecting before you even start thinking about the target operating model, for example. And what we look at is usually crown jewels. So the top, the critical assets, and that could be information, systems, people, anything that you'd really need to protect. Then thirdly, threat landscape. You cannot protect your crown jewels unless you know what you're protecting them against or from. And that would be, you'd look at threat scenarios and see how to model the threat scenarios in order to really assess the landscape and understand the full extent of what capabilities you need to build. Clearly, there's a talent piece. There's no organization without people, so very important. And in this area, we would also look at whether if you do have talent in your organization already, whether there's a need to upskill or to retrain certain teams, development, and so on. And then finally, how all the ingredients come together. It's in what we call the capabilities map, which is basically a map of all the skills and abilities that your cybersecurity team or organization will need to have. I think Ramona was mentioning, for example, identity and access management. There would be resilience. There could be vulnerability management. So all the different capabilities that would need to be put into this plan to go forward. Then if we can move to the next slide, very quickly, how to develop a cyber strategy. So what are the key steps that you go through to develop a strategy? You start your journey, you do a bit of an assessment scoping to really understand information about the business, information about what is the scope of the cybersecurity organization. Do you include physical security, for example, or do you stick to what is usually seen in information security domain? And then you'd go to a current state assessment. So you analyze what is the current situation of your cybersecurity organization. You'd map it to a state, like a target state, basically seeing where is it that we want to go in order to enable the business to follow its strategy in a secure way. Then we would run a bit of a gap analysis between the current state and the target state and come up with some recommendations for improvement. Then there could be some reporting if you want to show the different levels of maturity that you are successfully going through throughout your journey. And then finally, you would develop a roadmap on how to get to your target state. And that would lead straight into being ready for transformation. And this concludes my theory part. And I think I can hand over to Ursina And Ramona.
Thank you very much, Laura, for the detailed insight into the theory for cyber strategy. So now what we would like to do with you is to actually look how this looks in practice and how we can apply these learnings in a real life case. We have prepared a short case study, as Orsina has mentioned, on a cloud assessment. We will look actually at the company called Magic Bean Innovations. We will evaluate their current cloud security stance and then suggest them how they can become more cyber resilient. Orsina, do you want to go to the next slide? Perfect. So Magic Bean Innovations, or MBI, is a market-leading organization in the agriculture seed industry. They have an international distribution network and maintain their research hubs in different countries. More and more, they actually rely on products offered in the cloud and want to understand now how they can become more cyber resilient, meaning how to better protect users, applications, systems, etc., that use services provided in the cloud. So then here, we already come to our first question to you. Orsina, can I hand over to you for the next Menti question?
Yes, of course. So now we want to ask you, what do you think is the most important ingredient or ingredients that we need to consider when we want to define a cyber strategy for MBA? So we also asked ourselves this question because, of course, it can depend between different companies that the strategy is being derived from. For this MBA company, we concluded that the capabilities, the threat landscape, the gap analysis, and the assets, as well as a roadmap, are core ingredients that we need to derive a cyber strategy. Of course, risk management, as well as digital transformation strategies and talent development are important topics that will be or can influence the cyber strategy as well. But as a first step, we would start with the capabilities, the threat landscape, gap analysis, assets, and then the roadmap. So now let's look a bit closer at the use case and give you some examples. Back to you, Ramona.
Thank you very much, Orsina. Yeah, so what we will do together now is really to look at the different steps and aspects, as Orsina mentioned, that we would consider, and then also understand what can be the questions that we want to answer when actually doing such an assessment. So first, as you as well guessed, threat analysis, what could potentially pose a risk to MBI's assets in the cloud? So for example, you need to consider external factors in your analysis, such as regulations, customer expectations, or then also the industry. Because for instance, the agriculture seed industry will most likely not have the same risk profile as, for instance, a hospital in terms of data confidentiality, integrity, availability, etc. Then the next aspect, assets, as you also concluded, is extremely important. Especially, we need to understand which assets are actually worth protecting and which are not. And so basically, there are several things that you need to consider when defining this criticality of assets. The first aspect would be the data that the asset holds, and if this data actually needs to be protected. The second aspect would be the impact to the business if this asset and the data that it holds is not available. And then beyond that, you also need to look at architecture and the operating model, because you would like to understand how these assets actually work together, how they depend on each other, and then also look at that from a technical, but also from a business perspective.
Girls, just jumping, 5 minutes left for the presentation.
Great, thank you very much. Then another aspect are the capabilities, as we have discussed before. So what do we need to protect the assets? So we need the skills, we need talent, and we need the infrastructure. And then beyond that, what we have discussed before, we need to understand the current state. So what is MBI actually doing at the moment to protect assets? And then also what would be the ideal state? Where do they want to go? Where do they need to go to actually protect assets effectively? And most of the time, we observe that there actually is a discrepancy between those two states, so the current state and target state, and we need to understand what this gap is to conclude our analysis. So typically you would define about 7 to 10 clusters of what needs to be improved. You would also define the priorities of these clusters. You would look at the efforts that is needed in order so that you can identify actually what does need to be done now, what is urgent, and what can be done later. And from there, you would then actually have a roadmap, which is actually a time-based action plan to remediate the identified security gaps within the client's corporate environment. Okay, Orsina, can we go to the next slide? Excellent, thank you. So now we would like to actually look at an example of a cloud security maturity assessment conducted by professionals and understand how they identify these gaps and provide solutions to the client. So first of all, you may use a cloud security framework to assess a client's cloud posture against different capabilities. And in this framework that you see on the slide, we actually have 7 areas that we look at. So first of all, governance, the security monitoring capabilities, the resilience, the data protection framework they have in place, the identity and access management approach, and application security, and then also you look at the network and the infrastructure. So the information that you actually need to conduct these assessments can be collected, for instance, through client interviews, through available documentation, but then also through public records, if anything is available. Then the second assessment that you would conduct is actually you will use different leading scanning and monitoring tools to assess the policies, but also the security configurations against valid standards in the market. And a few examples of these scanning tools are actually also provided in the slides. Maybe some of them are familiar to you. And lastly, we would also perform what we call red teaming activities. That means that you would actually put yourself into the shoes of an attacker to imitate a real cyber attack, to understand the level of security in place. So for instance, you would look at the area of social engineering, which is actually tricking the user and providing, for instance, access information he or she should not provide, obviously. And this last part is actually complementary because it actually covers human component in the assessment, which actually are not covered by the first or the second analysis. And then to conclude our assessment, we would actually create a comprehensive diagram, which actually provides the information from all the 3 assessments in one graph, and you would actually provide the client with only the most relevant information in one single graph. And then from there, you would then define action steps together with the client. I hand back over to you, Rosina.
So thank you very much for that use case and explanation of how we applied it to a real case scenario. Now, we were wondering, before we start with the Q&A, what do you think, what you could take away from the session today, and how do you think you will apply it in the future? So please hop over to menti.com, type in the code, and then we'll be curious to see what your feedback is. And then we are happy that you could take something with you. Now I think it's time to ask your questions. I see that we have 2 already on the Q&A board.
So let me take the first one we got, which is, do you see any trends in the cyber strategy space these days? Has the pandemic had any impact on the topic? Very relevant. The first thing that comes to my mind is resilience. I think that's the new big shiny topic, which is not necessarily new, but I think it's something that we will need to embed in every cyber strategy that we will do going forward. Ramona or Sina, any other views? I think for me, it's resilience, hands-on. It's
Definitely, resilience, business continuity is a really big topic, especially with the pandemic still ongoing. A lot of companies have realized that it's very important and something we thought very unlikely, like a pandemic can happen, and it can impact the business and the daily business as well. So this is something that we see questions coming to us a lot more than in previous years.
I think there's also additional scrutiny from regulators, and that clearly adds a bit of pressure. So operational resilience, definitely BCM activities and so on. Yeah. We also have another question: when security strategies fail, what are the most common reasons for that? Ramona or Sina, any views from your side?
I would say that a different component is always the capabilities. So meaning that you need to have the right people in place, and that you need to have people supporting from external. So we're coming from Deloitte, so from an external perspective, but then also from an internal perspective, and that there is collaboration. So I think a lot of things or a lot of strategies may fail because there's discrepancy between opinions between the two parties, and that sometimes politics get in the way.
I can only echo that. I think one thing that I see quite often is companies, organizations in general, going full speed on a strategy without having a clear and common understanding of, it goes back to vision and mandate. So sort of having that target state shared among the main stakeholders. And it could be a bit into politics, as Ramona was saying as well, but sort of having that common understanding of where is it that we want to go, what is it that we want to achieve. That's, in my opinion, what sometimes makes strategies fail.
Thank you. I think we're at the end of our time. So to give a few final words, we were very happy to be here and thank you very much for your attention. We also compiled a few resources that we find very interesting. So if you request the slides, you get the links to 3 very interesting resources that give you some more insights into the topic of cyber strategy. And of course, if you didn't get to ask your questions, we also put our email addresses on the slide. So feel free to email us and we're happy to discuss any topics or questions that you have. And later on, we will also be in the Q&A session, of course.
Thanks a lot, ladies from Deloitte.